The clinking of silverware against fine china was the only sound that dared challenge the cold authority in Miranda Holt's voice. "This is unacceptable," she said, her tone low and sharp, not looking up from the financial report glowing on her tablet. Her assistant, Tessa Linwood, nodded silently beside her, already composing a scathing email in her head. "Your water, ma'am." A quiet voice. A steady hand placed a crystal glass on the polished mahogany table. Tessa glanced up, her eyes briefly meeting the waiter's. They were tired eyes, but clear. Her gaze dropped to his chest, to the small gold-plated name tag pinned neatly to his vest. Lucas. For a split second, Tessa's professional focus wavered. Lucas. The name hung in the air for a moment, a strange echo of a conversation she and Miranda had just that morning. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. A coincidence, of course. The city was full of them. Still, she found herself watching as he retreated from the table. Miranda finally looked up, her gaze dismissing the waiter instantly before landing on Tessa. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her tone making it clear there wasn't allowed to be one. From across the room, Lucas adjusted his tie. The weight of 3 lives, a desperate father, a powerful CEO, and a loyal assistant, already beginning to press down on the space between them. "No, Miranda." "No problem at all," Tessa replied, her focus snapping back into place. "I've drafted the response to their counteroffer. It's direct." "It needs to be," Miranda said, her attention already back on her tablet. "The board is getting nervous. They see Alaric Thorne's offer as a safety net. I see it as a cage." The name Alaric Thorne was spoken with a particular venom, a rival CEO whose predatory tactics were legendary. Just then, Miranda's phone buzzed, the vibration sharp against the wood. She glanced at the screen, and the muscle in her jaw tightened. "Speak of the devil," she answered, her voice dropping to an icy whisper. "Thorne." "You have 60 seconds," Tessa watched as Miranda's expression went from controlled anger to pure fury. The conversation was short, brutal, and ended with Miranda snapping the phone shut. "He's pulling out," she stated, her voice dangerously calm. "He claims our Q3 projections are unstable. He's lying. He's trying to drive our stock price down before a hostile takeover." She looked around the restaurant, her eyes scanning the opulent decor, the wealthy patrons, as if searching for something to blame. Her gaze landed on Lucas, who was approaching their table to deliver their appetizers. "Finally," she muttered, just loud enough for him to hear. Lucas placed a plate of seared scallops in front of her without a word, his movements precise and economical. He'd learned long ago that the best way to navigate a shift was to become invisible. But tonight, he could feel Miranda Holt's eyes on him like a physical weight. "Is there a problem with the service?" Miranda asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "You seem distracted." Lucas met her gaze for a brief moment. "No, ma'am. Just ensuring everything is to your satisfaction." "My satisfaction," Miranda repeated, a humorless smile touching her lips, "is a very high bar to clear. One I doubt you could comprehend." The insult hung in the air, sharp and ugly. Tessa shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She knew this side of Miranda, the pressure cooker's CEO who vented her frustrations on anyone she deemed beneath her. It was a part of the job Tessa had learned to tolerate, but never to like. Lucas simply nodded, his face a mask of professional neutrality. "Enjoy your meal." He turned and walked away, his back straight, his shoulders squared against the weight of her contempt. He slipped through the swinging doors into the bustling heat of the kitchen, the clatter of pots and pans a welcome shield. He leaned against a cool, stainless steel counter, pulling his phone from his pocket. The screen lit up with the smiling face of his 8-year-old daughter, Emma. Her hair was a wild mess of brown curls, and there was a gap in her smile where a tooth used to be. A new message was waiting for him. It was from Sarah, Emma's favorite nurse. "Emma's numbers are a little low today. She's asking for you, says you promised to finish the chapter about the dragon." Lucas's thumb hovered over the keyboard. He typed and deleted 3 different replies before settling on one. "Tell her I'll be there as soon as I can. Tell her the dragon is just waiting for the hero to arrive." He took a deep, shaky breath, the smell of garlic and searing steak filling his lungs. He needed this job. He needed the tips from tables like Miranda Holtz, people who could spend more on a single bottle of wine than he made in a week. Every dollar was a drop in the ocean of medical bills that threatened to drown him. His eyes fell on a discarded newspaper on the counter. A full-page ad for Holt Industries stared back at him, showcasing their new medical division. "Building a healthier future," the slogan read. Below it, in smaller print, was the name of their crowning achievement, the Prometheus procedure. Emma's last hope. A bitter irony twisted in his gut. He pushed himself off the counter, the mask of the invisible waiter settling back over his features. He had more tables to serve. He had a dragon to slay. And the woman in the dining room, the one who held the keys to his daughter's future in her perfectly manicured hands, had no idea he even existed. He was just the waiter, a ghost in her world of power and privilege. He pushed the kitchen doors open and stepped back into the fray. Lucas moved through the dining room with practiced ease, a phantom gliding between worlds of quiet celebration and intense business. When he returned to Miranda Holt's table, she and Tessa were deep in conversation, their voices low and urgent. He began to clear their appetizer plates, his movements swift and silent. "He's using the media to create a narrative of instability," Miranda said, her fingers drumming a frantic rhythm on the table. "By the time the market opens Monday, our stock will be in a free fall. He's not just trying to buy the company, he's trying to break it first." "We could issue a press release tonight," Tessa suggested, reaffirming our projections. "Show confidence." "Confidence?" Miranda scoffed. "Thorne will paint it as desperation." "Number. We need to strike back, not defend." As Lucas reached for Miranda's plate, the cuff of his white shirt rode up his arm by an inch. In the dim, atmospheric lighting of the restaurant, Tessa caught a fleeting glimpse of something on the back of his right hand. It wasn't a shadow. It was textured, different from the surrounding skin. But just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, hidden again by the sleeve as he straightened up. Tessa's brow furrowed. The name. And now this. A strange feeling, like a half-forgotten dream, pricked at the edge of her memory. Miranda noticed her assistant's momentary lapse in focus, and her irritation spiked. "Tessa, are you listening to me?" "This is critical." "Yes, of course," Tessa said, her eyes snapping back to Miranda, but her gaze drifted back to Lucas as he stacked the plates. This time, Miranda followed her line of sight, and her expression hardened with contempt. She couldn't stand weakness, and to her, a waiter was the embodiment of a life spent serving others instead of commanding them. His quiet presence was an irritant, a symbol of the ordinary world she had fought so hard to escape. "It must be a simple life," Miranda said suddenly, her voice laced with a strange mix of pity and scorn. She was speaking to Tessa, but her words were aimed squarely at Lucas. "Clock in, clock out. No real responsibilities. No empires to protect." The words struck Lucas with the force of a physical blow. No real responsibilities. He thought of Emma's pale face, the constant beeping of the machines that were keeping her alive, the crushing weight of every single decision he had to make. He thought of the file full of medical jargon he'd forced himself to learn, the desperate late-night calls to insurance companies, the soul-crushing burden of holding his child's life in his hands. His right hand, the one Tessa had glimpsed, clenched into a fist at his side, the knuckles turning white. Tessa saw the flicker of raw pain in his eyes before it was extinguished, replaced once more by that unnerving calm. She saw the tightening of his jaw, the subtle clenching of his fist. This was not the reaction of a man with no responsibilities. It was the reaction of a man carrying a burden so heavy, it was invisible to people like Miranda. Her suspicion solidified into a knot of certainty in her stomach. There was something more to this waiter. something important. When Miranda wasn't looking, Tessa gave Lucas a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent apology for her boss's cruelty. It was a tiny gesture, but in the cold, transactional space of the restaurant, it felt like a lifeline. Lucas acknowledged it with a slight dip of his head before turning to leave. "Forget him," Miranda said, waving a dismissive hand. "We need a plan. If Alaric Thorne wants a war, he'll get one. Book a press conference for 9 a.m. Monday, and get the legal team on the phone. I want to file an injunction against him for market manipulation. We'll bury him in litigation." She was back in her element, a general on the battlefield, her momentary cruelty forgotten. But Tessa was no longer fully present. Her mind was churning, trying to connect the dots. The name, the flash of a scar, the deep, hidden pain in his eyes. The main courses arrived, carried by a different server. Miranda immediately began to eat, her mind clearly elsewhere, already plotting her next move. Lucas, having delivered the empty plates to the kitchen, was walking past their table on his way to another. He thought he was clear, that the worst of the interaction was over. "Excuse me," a voice called out, quiet but firm. Lucas stopped and turned. It was Tessa. Miranda looked up, annoyed by the interruption. Tessa's expression was serious, her eyes searching his. "Lucas," she said, her voice dropping slightly, "I have a question for you, if you have a moment." Lucas turned back slowly, his posture wary. He expected another complaint, another thinly veiled insult. But Tessa Linwood's expression was not one of disdain. It was intense, searching, and surprisingly gentle. Miranda, however, leaned back in her chair, tapping an impatient finger against her wine glass. "Tessa, we don't have time for this," Miranda said, her voice sharp. "Whatever it is, it can wait." "It will only take a moment," Tessa replied, her eyes never leaving Lucas's face. She ignored her boss's escalating annoyance, a rare act of defiance that made Lucas's own curiosity peak. "I apologize if this is an odd question," Tessa began, choosing her words with care. "But your hands, you're very steady. You must have been doing this for a long time." It was a simple, observational question, but her gaze was fixed on his right hand, which he currently held at his side. Lucas was momentarily thrown. Of all the things he expected her to ask, it wasn't that. "I manage," he said, his answer deliberately vague. He instinctively shifted, his right hand moving slightly behind his back. It was an old habit, a subconscious motion to hide the one part of himself that always drew unwanted attention. The movement did not go unnoticed by Tessa. Her heart began to beat faster. She was close. She could feel it. "Don't be modest," Tessa pressed, a new edge of urgency in her voice. "A steady hand is a sign of great discipline. My father always said you could tell a lot about a man by his hands." At the mention of her father, Miranda's expression softened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of old grief crossing her features before the mask of command snapped back into place. The conversation felt surreal to Lucas. Here he was, his daughter's life hanging in the balance, discussing the steadiness of his hands with two of the most powerful women in the city. He just wanted it to be over. He needed to get back to the hospital. "I'm sure you have more important things to discuss," Lucas said, his voice polite but firm, a clear attempt to end the interaction. He started to turn away again. "Wait," Tessa said, a little too loudly. This time Miranda had had enough. "For heaven's sake, Tessa, what is the meaning of this?" "He's a waiter. Let him do his job." She gestured impatiently at Lucas. "My glass is empty. Do you think you could manage that simple task?" The command was deliberately demeaning. Lucas's jaw tightened, but he complied, stepping forward to retrieve the wine bottle from its silver chiller. He picked it up with his left hand, a practiced motion. But the angle was awkward. To pour without dripping, he had to steady the bottle's neck. Without thinking, he brought his right hand up to support it. And there it was, Under the direct focused beam of the overhead spotlight, the back of his right hand was fully illuminated. It wasn't a glimpse this time. It was a clear, undeniable view. A web of silvery puckered scar tissue stretched from his knuckles to his wrist, the skin permanently altered by an old, ferocious heat. It was the kind of scar that told a story of fire and pain. Tessa gasped, a tiny, sharp intake of breath. Her eyes locked onto the scar, and in that instant, every piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The name, the quiet strength, the hidden pain, and now the proof, seared into his skin. It's him. The thought was so loud in her head, she was shocked Miranda couldn't hear it. The world seemed to slow down, the clatter of the restaurant fading into a dull roar. The man Miranda Holt had been searching for, the hero her father had written about with such reverence, was standing right in front of them, pouring her wine like a servant. Miranda, oblivious, was looking at her phone, having already dismissed him. She didn't see the scar. She didn't see the look of stunned, earth-shattering realization on her best friend's face. Lucas finished pouring, his hand trembling almost imperceptibly. He hated people seeing the scar. It brought back memories he fought daily to suppress. The smell of gasoline, the searing heat, the screams. He quickly pulled his hand back, the cuff of his shirt falling back into place, hiding the evidence of his past. He placed the bottle back in the chiller and turned to leave, his heart hammering against his ribs. The intensity of Tessa's stare had unnerved him more than Miranda's insults. "Thank you, Lucas," Tessa whispered, her voice thick with an emotion he couldn't decipher. He nodded once, not trusting himself to speak, and walked away, disappearing into the comforting anonymity of the bustling restaurant. Tessa sat frozen, her mind a whirlwind. She looked at Miranda, who was now deep in a text conversation, her features set in a scowl of concentration. She had to tell her. But how? How do you tell your boss, a woman who despises weakness and sentiment, that the waiter she just humiliated is the one person on earth her family owes an unpayable debt to? The hero her father died wanting to thank? Miranda finally put her phone down, a grim look of satisfaction on her face. "There," she said. "Let's see Alaric Thorne wriggle his way out of this. I've just authorized a full-scale legal assault." She picked up her fork, ready to resume her meal, but paused, noticing Tessa's strange silence. "What's wrong with you tonight?" Miranda asked, a hint of genuine concern in her voice. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Tessa stared at her friend, the woman she had worked with for over a decade, the woman she knew better than anyone. She opened her mouth to speak, the monumental words forming on her lips. "Miranda, I found him." But she couldn't say it. Not yet. The timing, the setting, it was all wrong. The revelation was too fragile, too important. It couldn't be another casualty of Miranda's corporate war. "I'm fine," Tessa lied, the words feeling like ash in her mouth. "Just a headache." She took a sip of water, her hand shaking so much she nearly spilled it. Her mind wasn't on Alaric Thorne or hostile takeovers. It was on a quiet waiter with tired eyes, a daughter in a hospital, and a scar that had just changed everything. The rest of the meal was a blur for Tessa. Miranda talked strategy, dissecting Alaric Thorne's corporate history with the precision of a surgeon, but her words were a distant hum in Tessa's ears. Every time Lucas passed their table, a jolt went through her. She was no longer seeing a waiter. She was seeing a ghost from her best friend's past, a man of quiet, mythic heroism, now reduced to refilling water glasses and clearing away half-eaten bread. She noticed the slight fraying at the cuff of his sleeve, the worn-down heels of his shoes, details that now seemed like clues to a story of profound hardship. The contrast was staggering. Miranda, oblivious, was plotting a billion-dollar corporate war, while the man who had saved her father's life was likely worrying about his next paycheck. The injustice of it was a physical weight in Tessa's chest. She felt like a fraud, sitting there, eating food that cost more than his daily wage, armed with a secret that could rewrite all of their lives. "I need to make a call," Tessa said abruptly, interrupting Miranda mid-sentence. "Privately. It's about the injunction." It was a plausible lie, the only thing she could think of to escape the suffocating tension of the table. Miranda nodded, distracted. "Good. Be aggressive." "I want Thorne to feel the pressure from every angle." Tessa rose from her chair, her legs feeling unsteady. "I'll be right back." As she walked away, Lucas's shift manager signaled to him from across the room, tapping his watch. It was 10 p.m. His shift was over. A wave of relief so potent it almost made him dizzy washed over him. He could finally go to Emma. He moved quickly, slipping into the staff-only corridor and heading for the small, cramped locker room in the basement. The moment the door clicked shut behind him, the stoic mask of Lucas the waiter dissolved, replaced by the raw anxiety of Lucas the father. He stripped off his vest and tie, his fingers fumbling with the buttons of his shirt. Before changing, he grabbed his phone, his thumb immediately finding the hospital's number in his recent calls. The phone rang twice before Sarah, the night nurse, picked up. "St. Jude's Pediatric, this is Sarah." "Sarah, it's Lucas Harlow. How is she? How's Emma?" he asked, his voice strained. "Hey, Lucas." Sarah's voice was warm but tired. "She's sleeping now. Her heart rate was a little erratic earlier, but she's stabilized. She was asking for you, though. She wouldn't sleep until I promised to tell you she saved the last pudding cup for you." A weak, watery smile touched Lucas's lips. "That's my girl." Always thinking of her old man's stomach, the smile faded. "The erratic heart rate. Is that bad?" "The doctors say it's expected with her condition, Lucas. But it does mean we're running out of time for a long-term solution," Sarah said gently, confirming his deepest fears. "The Prometheus procedure. Have you had any luck?" The hope in her voice was like a knife in his gut. "Not yet," he said, the words tasting like failure. "But I'm still trying." "Don't you worry. I'm not giving up. We know you're not," she said softly. "Now get some rest. You sound exhausted." "I'm on my way now," he said, hanging up. He leaned his head against the cool metal of the locker, his eyes closed. "Running out of time." The words echoed in his head, a drumbeat of pure terror. Meanwhile, Tessa stood in a quiet alcove near the restaurant's lobby, her own phone in her hand. Her excuse to Miranda was a lie, but she was indeed making a call. To a private investigator she kept on retainer for Holt Industries for sensitive corporate matters. "Mark, it's Tessa Linwood," she said, her voice low. "I have an urgent, personal request. I need everything you can find on a man named Lucas Harlow, Harlow. I believe he works at the Crimson Arch restaurant. I need it tonight." She hung up and paced the small space, her mind racing. It felt like a gross invasion of his privacy. But she had to be sure. She had to know the full story before she presented it to Miranda. A few minutes later, Lucas emerged from the back alley employee exit, pulling on a worn denim jacket. The cool night air was a welcome relief from the stuffy heat of the kitchen. He started walking quickly, his path to the bus stop a familiar, ingrained route. He had to get to the hospital. He'd only made it a few feet down the dimly lit alley when a figure stepped out from the shadows of a doorway, blocking his path. He flinched, his body tensing, ready for a confrontation. It was Tessa Linwood. Her hair was slightly disheveled, and she was clutching her phone so tightly her knuckles were white. Her expression was a complex mixture of awe, pity, and unwavering resolve. "Lucas Harlow," she said, her voice shaking almost imperceptibly, but her eyes were locked on his. The buzzing of her phone in her hand signaled an incoming email, likely the report from her investigator. But she didn't look down. She didn't need to anymore. She knew. "We need to talk." Lucas stared at the woman in front of him, his mind struggling to place her outside the context of the restaurant. Tessa Linwood, the CEO's assistant. He braced himself for a complaint, a reprimand for some unknown breach of protocol. All he wanted was to leave. "I'm sorry, my shift is over," he said, his voice flat and tired. "If you have a complaint, you can speak with the manager tomorrow." He made a move to step around her, his eyes already focused on the street at the end of the alley, the gateway to the bus stop, to the hospital, to Emma. "This isn't about your shift," Tessa said, her voice firm enough to make him pause. "This is about 12 years ago. It's about a car fire on the interstate." The words hit him like a physical shock. The sounds of the city, the distant sirens, the rumble of traffic, faded away, replaced by a roar in his ears he hadn't heard in over a decade. He could smell the acrid smoke, feel the phantom heat on his skin. He stopped dead, his back to her, every muscle in his body rigid. He turned around slowly, his face a mask of disbelief and suspicion. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "What do you want?" "My name is Tessa Linwood. I work for Miranda Holt," she explained, taking a hesitant step closer. "The woman inside," Lucas said, a bitter understanding dawning on him. "This is some kind of joke? A background check on the waitstaff?" "No, God, no," Tessa said, shaking her head, her expression earnest. "Miranda's father. He was the man in the car, the man you pulled from the wreckage." Lucas's blood ran cold. He had never known the man's name. In the chaos of the aftermath, he had slipped away, a nameless teenager with a badly burned hand, wanting no part of the attention or the questions. He'd buried the memory, walled it off from his current life. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, the denial automatic, a reflex built over 12 years of silence. "Please don't," Tessa pleaded, her voice soft. "He never forgot you?" "Before he died, he told Miranda everything. He told her about the brave young man named Lucas who saved his life." She took another step, her gaze dropping pointedly to his right hand, which was clenched into a fist at his side. "And he told her about the scar." The fight went out of him. His shoulders slumped, the denial crumbling into a pile of long-buried memories. He looked down at his own hand, at the permanent, silvery reminder of that night. It was real. This was happening. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why now, after all this time?" "She's been looking for you," Tessa said, her voice thick with emotion. "Ever since he died. Her father made her promise she would find you, to thank you, to repay the debt." The word repay hung in the alley, a meaningless concept to Lucas. He hadn't done it for a reward. He had done it because it was the right thing to do. He looked past Tessa at the glowing windows of the restaurant. He thought of Miranda Holt, of her cold eyes and cruel words. The idea that she, of all people, was searching for him felt like a cosmic joke. Just then, Tessa's phone buzzed in her hand, a sharp, insistent vibration. She glanced down, her eyes scanning the first few lines of the email that had just arrived, the preliminary report from her investigator. Her face went pale. The professional composure she had maintained throughout the conversation dissolved into pure, unadulterated shock. The report was concise. Lucas Harlow, 32, widowed. Sole custody of one daughter, Emma Harlow, 8. Current patient at St. Jude's Pediatric Cardiology Unit. Diagnosis, restrictive cardiomyopathy. Awaiting. Tessa didn't need to read the rest. She knew what it would say. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with a horrified understanding that went far beyond the chance discovery of a long-lost hero. The universe wasn't just playing a joke. It was weaving a tragedy. The hero's daughter was dying, and the woman who held the cure was the same one who had mocked her father's savior. Lucas saw the change in her expression, the dawning horror, and his own fear spiked. "What is it? What's wrong?" Tessa looked at him, no longer seeing a figure from the past, but a man trapped in an impossible present. A crisis that was inextricably, cruelly linked to the woman sitting inside the restaurant. The coincidence was too great, too terrible to comprehend. "Your daughter," Tessa said, her voice dropping to a strangled whisper. "Emma." Lucas's heart stopped. "How do you know her name?" Tessa held up her phone, the screen glowing in the darkness. "She's at St. Jude's. She needs the Prometheus procedure, from Holt Industries." It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a death sentence, and a prayer all in one. Lucas stared at her, his secret past and his secret present colliding in the dark, damp alley. Everything he had kept separate, everything he had hidden, was now laid bare. Exposed by the one person in the world who held all the cards, the one person who could either save his daughter or let her die. The powerlessness he felt was absolute, a crushing weight that stole the air from his lungs. A cold fury, sharp and protective, sliced through Lucas's shock. This was no longer about a forgotten past, it was about his daughter, his Emma. Her sacred, fragile life had been dug up and exposed in some clandestine report. "Have you been investigating me?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He took a step forward, his exhaustion replaced by a father's primal anger. "Who gave you the right to look into my daughter's life?" Tessa flinched but held her ground. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice laced with genuine remorse. "I had to be sure it was you." "I had no idea about your daughter until a minute ago, I swear." She held up her phone as if it were proof of her sincerity. "Lucas, this changes everything. You have to understand. Miranda, she has to help. This is the debt." "It's what her father wanted." Lucas let out a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. "The debt?" "Your boss wouldn't recognize a moral debt if it was printed on a stock certificate. The only thing she understands is power." He jabbed a finger back toward the restaurant. "I know exactly who she is. Holt Industries already denied our application for financial aid. I have the rejection letter at home, signed with a crisp M. Holt. She's already had her chance to help. She said no." His pride, the only thing he had left, rose up like a shield. He hadn't asked for a reward 12 years ago, and he wouldn't beg for one now. His daughter's life was not a chit to be cashed in. "She didn't know who you were," Tessa insisted, her desperation growing. "It was an anonymous file to her, one of 1,000. If she knew it was you, it would be worse." Lucas cut her off, his voice raw with conviction. "People like her don't like being indebted. They resent it. She'll see this as a complication, a liability. She'll crush us just to clear the board." He looked at Tessa, his eyes pleading. "You can't tell her. Promise me." "I'd rather lose everything with dignity than be a pawn in her game." They were at an impasse. A hero from the past begging to be forgotten, and the one person who knew his secret, convinced it was his only salvation. "Dignity won't save your daughter's life," Tessa said, her voice cracking. The words were brutal, but they were true. "You're out of options. You told the nurse you weren't giving up. This is what not giving up looks like. It's messy, and it's terrifying, but it's a chance. Please, Lucas, trust me." Inside the restaurant, Miranda paid the bill, leaving a tip that was insultingly generous. But Tessa still hadn't returned. A prickle of annoyance went through her. Tessa was never this unprofessional. First her distraction at the table, now this disappearing act. Miranda, used to being the center of her assistant's universe, felt a strange unease. Leaving a trail of powerful, angry men in her wake didn't frighten her, but a deviation in Tessa's loyalty. That was something to be concerned about. She rose from the table, her movements sharp and decisive. She bypassed the main entrance and headed for the staff corridor, assuming Tessa had gotten cornered by a chatty restaurant manager. She pushed open the heavy employee exit door, stepping into the cool, damp air of the back alley. And then she saw them. They were illuminated by a single, bare bulb above the doorway, her loyal, indispensable assistant, and the waiter. They were standing too close, their conversation clearly not about dinner service. Tessa's face was filled with a desperate, pleading emotion Miranda had never seen before. The waiter, Lucas, looked cornered, his expression a volatile mix of anguish and defiance. A cold, possessive suspicion washed over Miranda. What was this? What secret could her assistant possibly share with this man? Tessa, her voice was sharp as shattering glass, cutting through the alley's charged silence. Both Lucas and Tessa froze, turning to face her. The moment of truth had arrived, uninvited and unforgiving. Miranda's eyes, shrewd and analytical, darted from Tessa's panicked expression to Lucas's guarded one. "What is going on out here?" she demanded, her gaze finally settling on Lucas with icy disdain. "Don't you have dishes to wash?" The alley was suddenly silent, the single bare bulb overhead casting long, distorted shadows. Miranda Holt stood with her arms crossed, the unquestioned queen of her corporate world, now holding court in a grimy back alley. Her sharp, analytical gaze shifted between her assistant's panicked face and the waiter's defiant one, trying to compute the unbelievable scenario in front of her. "I asked you a question, Tessa," Miranda repeated, her voice dangerously low. "What are you doing with him?" The pause, the deliberate emphasis on the word him, was designed to wound, to remind Lucas of his place. Lucas flinched, a fresh wave of humiliation washing over him. He felt Tessa's eyes on him, a silent, desperate plea. He gave the slightest shake of his head, a final, futile attempt to keep his worlds from colliding. "Don't do it." But it was too late. Miranda's presence had forced the issue. Tessa saw his silent plea, and her heart broke for him. But she also saw the image of a dying little girl in a hospital bed. The choice was brutal, but it was clear. She took a deep breath, turning to face Miranda fully. The apology in her eyes was for Lucas. The resolve in her voice was for his daughter. "Miranda," Tessa began, her voice trembling slightly, "do you remember the promise you made to your father?" The question was so unexpected, so out of context, that it completely disarmed Miranda. Her expression shifted from anger to baffled confusion. "What? What does my father have to do with this ridiculous scene?" "Everything," Tessa said, her voice gaining strength. "The letter he left you, the man he told you about, the one who saved his life." Miranda's breath hitched, her annoyance momentarily forgotten, replaced by a flicker of the old, familiar grief. "Tessa, what are you talking about? This is neither the time nor the place." "But it is," Tessa insisted, her gaze unwavering. She took a half step to the side, gesturing almost unconsciously toward Lucas, who stood frozen, a deer in the headlights. The time for subtlety was over. The time for whispers was gone. "The man from the bridge collapse," Tessa said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, echoing the story she'd told inside. But that wasn't right. That was her story. She corrected herself, her voice ringing with the clarity of truth. "No, not the bridge. The car fire." Miranda's eyes narrowed. "What?" Tessa's gaze locked with her boss's. It was now or never. "That's him, ma'am." The words, so simple, so direct, hung in the cold night air. They didn't make sense to Miranda. Her brain, accustomed to complex data and logical progressions, refused to process them. Him was the waiter. The hero was a legend, a figure of mythic importance in her family's history. The two could not be the same. "Don't be ridiculous," Miranda snapped, a nervous tremor in her voice. "You're overwrought. This man is a waiter." "Look at his hand, Miranda," Tessa urged, her voice cracking. "Your father said he would have a scar." On his right hand it happened in slow motion. Miranda's eyes, against her will, were drawn down to Lucas's right hand. He had instinctively tried to shove it into his jacket pocket, but he was too late. Under the stark glare of the alley light, the silvery webbed tissue of the burn scar was undeniable. The world stopped. For Miranda Holt, the alley, the city, Her entire universe tilted on its axis. The image of the scar was a key, unlocking a flood of memories she had compartmentalized for years. Her father's voice, weak from his hospital bed, describing the searing heat. The door was jammed, Miranda. The flames were everywhere. And then this boy, this young man. He just appeared. He wrenched the door open with his bare hand. Her mind flashed to the worn, tear-stained pages of his letter. Find him. Find the boy named Lucas. His hand. The fire caught his hand as he pulled me free. Find him and show him what a Holt's gratitude looks like. She looked from the scar on Lucas's hand to the tired, desperate eyes of the man she had mocked not an hour before. The hero of her father's story. The waiter who served her scallops. The father whose application for aid she had denied without a second thought. The cold, calculated armor she had spent her life building cracked. Then it shattered. The color drained from her face, leaving a pale, waxen mask of pure shock. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The air seemed to turn to ice in her lungs. She couldn't breathe. She froze. Her entire body went rigid, her expensive heels cemented to the grimy pavement. She was no longer a CEO. She was no longer a warrior. She was just the daughter of the man he had saved, and the woman who had, in a twist of cruel cosmic irony, been given the power to either save or destroy his own child. The weight of it all, the debt, the promise, the cruelty, the desperation, crashed down on her in one silent, devastating wave. The silence that followed was absolute. Tessa watched Miranda, her heart pounding, holding her breath. Lucas stood before the powerful woman who held his daughter's fate in her hands, exposed and terrified, waiting for the verdict. The silence in the alley stretched for what felt like an eternity, thick and heavy with the weight of unspoken history. Lucas could hear his own heart beating, a frantic, terrified drum against his ribs. Miranda's face, illuminated by the harsh overhead light, was a canvas of warring emotions, shock, denial, and a slowly dawning, soul-crushing shame. Finally, she moved. It was a small, jerky motion, as if her body was relearning how to operate. She took a single, unsteady step forward, her eyes never leaving Lucas. The ice in her voice had melted, replaced by something brittle and fragile. "Is it true?" she asked, the words barely a whisper. It wasn't an accusation. It was a plea, a desperate hope that this might all be some terrible misunderstanding. Lucas looked from her shattered expression to Tessa's anxious one. The time for denial was over. He gave a single, tired nod. Yes. The simple confirmation seemed to strike Miranda harder than any lengthy explanation could have. She visibly recoiled, her hand flying to her mouth as if to stifle a gasp. The image of her father, his face alight with gratitude as he described his rescuer, superimposed itself over the face of the weary man standing before her. The man she had ridiculed. The man she had dismissed. Her mind, usually a fortress of logic and strategy, was in chaos. Every cruel word she had spoken, every condescending glance, now played back in her memory, each one a fresh stab of guilt. She had been so determined to honor her father's legacy by building his company into an empire, but in the process, she had completely failed to honor his final, most personal wish. She hadn't just failed to find his savior. She had found him and treated him like dirt. The shame was a physical thing, a hot, suffocating wave that threatened to bring her to her knees. Tessa saw the storm in Miranda's eyes and knew this was the moment to bring the past into the present. "Miranda," she said gently, stepping forward, "there's more. It's not just about what happened back then. It's about now. Lucas, his daughter Emma, she's the reason he's working here. She's sick." Miranda's head snapped toward Tessa, her eyes clouded with confusion. "His daughter?" Tessa's heart ached. This was the final, most devastating blow. "The application," she said, her voice soft but clear. "The one for the Prometheus procedure that came through Finance Committee on Monday. The one we denied." She paused, letting the weight of her next words land with their full, terrible force. That was for his daughter. If the first revelation had cracked Miranda's world, this one pulverized it into dust. The corporate feud with Alaric Thorne, the stock prices, the injunctions, all of it vanished, shrinking into complete and utter insignificance. All she could see was a chain of causality, a cruel, karmic loop that started with a selfless act of heroism and was ending with a cold, bureaucratic denial. Her father was given decades of extra life because of Lucas Harlow, and she, his daughter, had just denied Lucas's own child that same chance. The perfect, horrifying symmetry of it stole the breath from her lungs. She turned back to Lucas, and for the first time, she truly saw him. Not as a waiter, not as an inconvenience, but as the man his father had described. A hero. A hero who was now a desperate father, fighting a battle far more important than any corporate takeover. The power dynamic between them hadn't just shifted, it had inverted, leaving her in a moral deficit so profound it felt like bankruptcy. The shock finally gave way to a new, urgent clarity. The shame was still there, but now it was a fuel, igniting a fierce, desperate need to act, to atone, to fix what she had so terribly broken. Her father's debt was no longer a vague, sentimental mission. It was a clear, life-or-death imperative. She straightened up, the CEO's decisiveness returning, but it was transformed, imbued with a new, raw purpose. Her voice, when she spoke, was devoid of its earlier arrogance. It was quiet, strained, but held a core of absolute resolve. She looked at Lucas, her eyes pleading for an understanding he had no reason to give her. "Get in the car," she said, her voice cracking on the last word. It wasn't a command, it was a request. "Both of you." She turned, not waiting for an answer, and strode toward the street where her driver was waiting, her confident stride now looking like a desperate flight. A flight from her own failure and a race toward a chance at redemption. "We're going to the hospital," she called back over her shoulder, her voice ringing with an authority that was no longer about power, but about penance. Now, the ride to the hospital was a strange, suspended reality. The three of them sat in the plush leather interior of Miranda's town car, a bubble of silent, churning emotion moving through the city's glittering nightscape. Lucas stared out the window, the familiar streets of his commute looking alien and foreign from this new vantage point. He felt like a passenger in his own life, swept up in a current so powerful he had no choice but to be carried along. Miranda was not silent. The moment the car doors closed, her phone was in her hand, her thumb flying across the screen. She wasn't texting about business. She was mobilizing an army. "Dr. Alistair, it's Miranda Holt. I'm on my way to St. Jude's Pediatric. I want the entire file for a patient named Emma Harlow on my tablet in 5 minutes. And I want you out of whatever dinner party you're at and at the hospital in 30. No, I don't care that it's your anniversary. This is your new anniversary." Her voice was the same razor-sharp instrument of command she had used all night, but the target had changed. The full force of her will, the immense power of her position, was no longer being aimed at a corporate rival, but at a child's disease. She made 3 more calls in quick succession, overriding protocols, authorizing expenditures, and demanding the presence of the top pediatric surgeon in the state. Lucas watched her, a dizzying mix of hope and terror swirling in his gut. An hour ago, this woman was his tormentor, an obstacle. Now she was a force of nature tearing down every barrier he had spent months fruitlessly chipping away at. The sheer speed of it was terrifying. He had lost all control, surrendering his daughter's fate to the woman who had, until tonight, been his unwitting enemy. Tessa sat quietly, a steadying presence between the two of them. She reached into the car's mini-fridge and handed Lucas a bottle of water. "Drink," she said softly. It was a small gesture, but it grounded him, a reminder that there was still humanity in the midst of this whirlwind. When they arrived at St. Jude's, the hospital administrator, having been alerted by a frantic call from the head of the board, was waiting for them at the entrance. "Miss Holt, this is an unexpected," he began, his face a mixture of deference and confusion. Miranda walked past him without breaking stride, her focus absolute. "Which way to the pediatric cardiology wing?" she asked, her voice leaving no room for pleasantries. The walk down the brightly painted corridors was a silent, brutal education for Miranda. Cheerful murals of cartoon animals and smiling suns did little to mask the quiet, anxious energy of the place. She saw other parents in the waiting areas, their faces etched with the same exhaustion and fear she now saw so clearly on Lucas's. These were the people behind the files, the families attached to the funding requests her company processed and, all too often, denied. For the first time, the consequences of her detached, bottom-line-driven leadership felt real, and the weight of it was crushing. They stopped outside room 307. A hand-drawn picture of a dragon was taped to the door, with "Emma's lair, trespassers will be roasted," written in shaky crayon. Lucas paused, his hand hovering over the doorknob. This was his sanctuary, the one place in the world that was his and Emma's alone. He looked at Miranda, his protective instincts warring with his desperate hope. Miranda understood. She, who had never asked for permission for anything in her life, now waited for his. Her voice was barely audible. "May I?" Lucas looked at the crayon drawing, at the name of the woman who held the key to his daughter's future, and gave a slow, deliberate nod. He pushed the door open. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the medical monitors that stood like silent sentinels around the small bed. Emma was asleep, her small face pale against the white pillow, her chest rising and falling in a shallow, monitored rhythm. The nurse, Sarah, looked up from her chart, her eyes widening in surprise to see Lucas accompanied by two women in immaculate business attire. The sight of the small, fragile child in the bed was the final blow to Miranda's composure. This was it, the real bottom line, the culmination of a 12-year-old promise and a day-old rejection letter. A lump formed in her throat, so thick she couldn't swallow. This sleeping child was the living embodiment of her family's debt and her own profound failure. As if sensing the new presence in the room, Emma stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open, and she looked around sleepily until she saw her father. A weak but brilliant smile lit up her face. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice raspy. "You came. You forgot my pudding. I'll get you two tomorrow," Lucas promised, his voice thick with emotion as he rushed to her side and took her small hand. Emma's gaze then drifted past him to the two strangers standing near the door. She wasn't scared, just curious. "Who are your friends?" Lucas froze, the question hanging in the air. How could he possibly explain who this woman was? The cruel boss? The daughter of the man he'd saved? The person who held her life in her hands? Before he could even attempt to form an answer, Miranda stepped forward, moving slowly, as if not to frighten a small animal. She stopped a few feet from the bed, all the power and arrogance she had wielded for years stripped away, leaving only a raw, aching vulnerability. She looked at the small girl, the granddaughter her father would never know, and felt the full, crushing weight of the moment. Her voice, when she spoke, was gentle and thick, with an emotion she hadn't let herself feel in years. "Hello, Emma," she said, her throat tight. "My name is Miranda. I was a friend of your family's a long time ago, and I think I'm here to help." Emma, with the simple, unwavering trust of a child, accepted Miranda's explanation without question. She just smiled, a small, sleepy gesture that did more to disarm the powerful CEO than any corporate negotiation ever had. "Are you going to help me get more pudding?" she asked, her voice a hopeful whisper. A watery laugh escaped Miranda's lips, a sound so unexpected and genuine that Tessa, Lucas, and even the nurse Sarah stared at her. I will buy you the entire pudding factory, Miranda promised, her voice thick with unshed tears. Just then, a man in his late 50s, dressed in a tailored suit but with the harried look of someone who had just run a marathon, appeared in the doorway. It was Dr. Allister, the head of Holt Medical's surgical division. "Miss Holt," he said, slightly out of breath. "I got here as fast as I could. I have Emma's file." The atmosphere in the room shifted. The emotional weight of the reunion was now met with the urgent reality of the medical crisis. Miranda was instantly focused, the CEO in her reawakening. But this time, her formidable intellect was fused with a deeply personal mission. They moved to a small consultation area just down the hall, the doctor spreading charts and scans across a table. For 20 minutes, Miranda interrogated him, her questions sharp, precise, and surprisingly well-informed. She wasn't just a benefactor, she was a partner in the fight, absorbing the complex medical information, seeking to understand every risk, every percentage point of success. Lucas stood beside her, listening as the abstract horror of his daughter's condition was translated into the clinical language of science and surgery. For the first time, he wasn't hearing vague reassurances or sympathetic platitudes. He was hearing a plan. "She's a perfect candidate," Dr. Allister concluded, pointing to a specific line on a chart. "With the Prometheus procedure, her chances of a full recovery are over 90%. The only barrier was the preliminary funding and the surgical schedule." Miranda looked at him, her expression unyielding. "There are no more barriers," she said. "Clear the schedule. I want her in the operating room as soon as it is safely possible. My foundation will cover every cent. Is that understood?" "Yes, Miss Holt," the doctor said, a look of profound relief on his face. "Absolutely." When they returned to Emma's room, she was asleep again. Tessa, seeing the exhaustion on Lucas's face and the fragile composure Miranda was barely holding on to, gently shooed the nurse out and offered to sit with Emma so the two of them could talk. Miranda led Lucas to a small, deserted family waiting room at the end of the hall. They sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs under the hum of a fluorescent light, a world away from the mahogany and crystal of the restaurant. For a long moment, Miranda just stared at her hands, unable to meet his gaze. "I have spent the last 4 years," she began, her voice low and strained, "trying to honor my father. I thought that meant growing his company, crushing his rivals, making the Holt name more powerful than ever. I was so focused on the empire, I completely forgot about the man." She finally looked up, her eyes shining with shame and regret. "What you did for him. That was the single greatest gift our family ever received. And in return, I treated you with contempt. I don't just mean tonight. My company, my policies. We failed you. We failed your daughter. For that, I am so sorry. More sorry than I can possibly say." The apology was real, stripped of all artifice. Lucas saw not a CEO, but a daughter mourning her father and grappling with her own failures. His anger, the bitterness that had been his constant companion for months, began to dissolve. "He was a good man," Lucas said quietly. "I'm glad I was there. He left me a letter," Miranda continued, her hand instinctively going to her heart. "He begged me to find you, not just to repay you with money, but to show you the depth of our family's gratitude. What's happening now? With Emma, it's not a transaction, it's not charity." She looked at him, her expression pleading for him to understand. "It's the only way I can even begin to make things right. It's the only way I can honor my father." Lucas finally understood. This wasn't about power or pity. It was about a promise, a daughter's love, a debt that transcended money. He gave a slow, deliberate nod of acceptance. "Thank you, Miranda." She wasn't finished. "My company needs to change. I need to change. This has shown me how disconnected I've become." She leaned forward, her gaze intense. "When this is over, when Emma is well, I want to offer you a job. Not in a restaurant. At Holt Industries. in our patient advocacy department. Someone who understands what families go through, someone with integrity. My company needs more people like you. Lucas. 3 months later, the winter sun streamed into Emma's hospital room, illuminating the cheerful "Welcome Home" banner hanging on the wall. The surgery had been a resounding success. Emma, her cheeks now rosy and full, was sitting up in bed, laughing as she beat Miranda soundly in a game of cards. The gap in her smile was wider now, a sign of a healthy, growing kid. Lucas stood by the window, watching them. He was wearing a simple, comfortable sweater, his face relaxed and free from the deep lines of exhaustion that had been carved there before. He had accepted Miranda's offer. His new life had already begun. Miranda caught his eye and smiled, a real, warm smile that reached her eyes. It was a look of shared history, of a debt repaid, and of a new, unlikely friendship forged in the crucible of crisis and kindness. Emma, feeling the quiet moment pass between them, reached out her hands. "Daddy, Miranda, come on. One more game before we go home." Lucas and Miranda moved to either side of the bed, each of them taking one of Emma's small hands. In that moment, they weren't a CEO and a former waiter. They were just two people, bound by a single act of courage 12 years earlier. Two people who had, against all odds, found their way to a future that was brighter than either of them could have ever imagined. A testament to a father's undying wish and the enduring power of a hero's heart. What a journey that was. It's amazing how a story can change the feeling in a room, isn't it? My hope is that these stories aren't just an escape, but a spark. A reminder of the courage and resilience that lives inside of you, too. If there's one thought or lesson from this that you'll carry with you, I would genuinely love to hear it in the comments below. And I'm always fascinated to see our global family, so feel free to share where you're listening from. If you want to keep finding that spark with us, the subscribe button is right there. We share a new story regularly, each one a testament to the strength of the human spirit. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for being here. In a world full of noise, sharing this quiet moment with you means everything. So, until our paths cross again, be the main character in your own story. And be a kind one.